I never told anybody.
In 1947, Glenn Dennis was the local mortician at Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell. One day, Mr. Dennis received phone calls from the base mortuary officer asking how to preserve a body that had lain exposed to the elements, what embalming chemicals would do to the blood, tissue, and stomach contents, and did he have child-sized, hermetically sealed coffins?
We didn't even have one. I said, we don't have hermetically sealed. We had a 3-foot baby casket, but not hermetically sealed. How long would it take you to get some? And I said, well, who are you and how many do you need? And he said, that's not important, but he says, answer my question. I said, well, I'll call Amarillo by 3:30 this afternoon. I'll have him in here by 9 o'clock. O'Neill truck will in the next morning. That's how fast we can get him in here. He said, oh, I'll get back with you. There again, I said, what's going on? And he hung up. Then where I really got in trouble was when I went out on that emergency with that airman. I got a call, and it was a airman riding an old Indian motorcycle over here on the east side of town. And where I usually park when I got out there, that's where these street field ambulances were backed up against the ramp. And so this airman and I walked up the ramp, and one of the doors, it was open, both of the doors, the swing doors open. There's a lot of debris back there.
An initial examination of the alien bodies was performed there at the base hospital. During the autopsy, a nurse, who was a friend of Glenn Dennis's, happened to walk into the room where the examination of the creatures was taking place. The next day, the nurse agreed to meet with Glenn and proceeded to tell him about the autopsy and what she had witnessed. She described the bodies of the creatures in detail and even drew a diagram of what they looked like.
And she said the heads were larger, even though these heads were very mutilated. She said that the way they described it, the eyes were quite large. They didn't have pupils or anything like us. They only had 2 ear canals. They didn't have the ear lobes or the deal. There was 2 orifices. Didn't have a bridge for the nose. The mouth was only like 1 inch. This is the way she described it to me.
The doctors were concerned that the hospital's ventilation system was inadequate and that the bodies could be toxic, so the examination was stopped. The bodies were then moved to Hangar 84, where they could complete the initial autopsy. The debris from the crashed disc, as well as the bodies, were kept here at the hangar under armed guard until they could be crated up and shipped to higher headquarters.
She became very upset and started crying and everything, and that's when and she started shaking. I said, I'm taking you back to the barracks. We can't go on with this. So this is more or less where we ended right then and there. 3:30 the next day she was gone.
Colonel William Blanchard was the commanding officer at Roswell Army Airfield. Colonel Blanchard acted swiftly to retrieve all evidence of the crashed saucers.
One thing that I did talk to my dad about later, this was shortly before he died, he had gone on an interview with some people out of New Orleans to New Mexico, and I guess they went to the crash site that he was involved with. And this is on a phone conversation with him. I said, well, were any parts of this left out there? Do you think there could possibly be a small fragment under a rock or a cactus or a gopher hole? And he says, no. And he says, when this happened, they vacuumed that place up. Those are his words. They vacuumed this place up.
Colonel Blanchard also had to handle the problem with the press, who somehow had found out about the increased activity at the base.
They announced that they had caught these aliens, and they had captured a flying saucer from outer space, and the media people all laughed and basically left the building. That's no story. They went back into Colonel Blanchard's office, and between the Major and Colonel Blanchard, they concocted a story. That's when they called Walter Hott to come over and told him what to write, and Walter went back to his office and put the story together, and then under orders, hand-delivered it to the radio stations and newspapers before lunch.
Basically, he called me into his office and said, we need to put out a press
press release, and we want to cover a lot of ground. We want to clear up a lot of the questions that the townspeople have got. People have been coming in and asking questions. We've got to wipe this slate clean as best I can remember what he said.
Walter Haut was the public information officer for the 509th Atomic Bomb Unit stationed at Roswell Army Airfield. Mr. Haut was the man responsible for writing the press release that stated to the world that the Army Air Force had just recovered a flying disc.
He had written out some key phrases for me, and then he read it to me, and it was clear enough then by what he had written that I could look at it and I could follow it through again after he gave me that piece of paper.
When the news was released that the United States Army Air Force had captured a flying saucer, the phones did not stop ringing as reporters from all over the globe called to find out about the flying disc. And when the news of the press release reached the Pentagon, the top brass wanted to know who Walter Haut was and why he had released such a statement.
Walter had been a bombardier in more than 30 raids over Japan. You follow orders, that's what it's all about. There's no question about going off and coming up with a crazy story on your own. You'd be in a brick in 2 hours, you know.
In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet.
Yeah, he called down to operations and said, I want a B-29 sitting out front with a crew. I'm sending the crew. I'm picking the crew, and I want the aircraft sitting out in front of operations building, and I'll be down shortly.
Brigadier General Roger Ramey was the commander of the 8th Army Air Force stationed in Fort Worth, Texas. The 509th Atomic Bomb Group was a part of the 8th Army Division and answered solely to General Ramey. Ramey ordered Colonel Blanchard to load a B-29 with wreckage and make a stop at Fort Worth so he could take control of the situation.
I came back in just as Colonel Blanchard came in the front door and said, where's my airplane? And I said, parked right out front. And with this, he waved his hands at some people out standing on a sidewalk, and they filed through the building carrying these boxes, open cardboard boxes with various pieces of aluminum-looking material. I recognized that 3 or 4 of the men I had never seen before. Everyone was dressed in civilian clothes except Major Marcel. Major Marcel was in uniform and carrying one of the boxes. About an hour later, the newspapers came out, and that enabled me to put 2 and 2 together, and suddenly I understood what was going on.
Now that the B-29 carrying Major Marcel and the wreckage was headed for Fort Worth, General Ramey could begin orchestrating the cover-up of the crash and retrieval by the U.S. government of flying saucers and the aliens that piloted them. It was at Fort Worth that the debris from the flying disc was substituted with the wreckage of an ordinary weather balloon. Major Marcel was ordered not to speak and was forced to pose holding the remnants of a Rowan radar target used to reflect radar signals as the weather balloon rises in the air. For only one day, on the 8th of July, 1947, the world knew the truth about the recovery of a flying disc at Roswell, New Mexico. The very next morning, the headlines revealed that the extraordinary capture of a flying saucer from outer space was nothing more than an ordinary weather balloon. The Air Force had succeeded in retrieving the find of the century and then had covered it up completely.
When he came back, he said, this is something that we were not to discuss ever. This is just something like it didn't happen. And that's the way we treated it for many, many years. And it wasn't until maybe years later that we started talking about that, because he had always thought this was part of a flying saucer, and I knew this was something very different too.
Those who signed over for secrecy, all because of weather balloons, you know. And why, with the atomic bomb group located here and the highest technology located in this state, could not someone there recognize a weather balloon? To me, that's a good question.
If the United States Air Force has actually recovered the remains of crashed UFOs and bodies of extraterrestrials, where is the proof?
I have to tell you, I myself, now I've never seen quote, an extraterrestrial, even though I worked in Area 51. And during the years that I was there, among the people around, I worked out in the flats because we were laying cable and things of that nature. But even then, the folks that worked around there indicated that there were, in fact, the extraterrestrials from the New Mexico incident that were back in the mountain. We have that particular mountain there has giant areas inside with buildings and things of that nature. So we were always, or at least I always remember people indicating that there were, in fact, in there.
Now, at the present time, the 696 Air Intelligence Group up in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, continue to investigate UFOs for the Air Force without public knowledge.
There are skeptics who reason that it would be impossible for our planet to be visited by beings from other stars. Because of the thousands of Earth years it would take us to traverse the distance between us and the nearest star utilizing technologies found here on Earth, naturally it would be impossible to make the trip. But what if they are already here, and they have had a base in our solar system since the beginning of recorded history? Apollo 11 reported as they came around the backside of the moon that indeed there was a Santa Claus. Was that the secret code to signal that the moon was indeed inhabited? During other Apollo missions to the moon, our astronauts reported seeing unidentified flying objects that were immense and were watching the astronauts as they walked on the moon.
Well, my personal feeling about the national security aspect of this is that I think most people would recognize that we're not alone in the universe, and that may very possibly have been visited by other people. Why this would be kept as a national security item, I have no idea, unless it's something that we really don't want to know about. You know, that we really don't have control of our skies or our destiny. That maybe there's a civilization that's...
His work, the technology, they make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems.
It's quite possible that some of these things seen in more recent years, and I'm talking primarily in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, could be some reverse engineering. But the original Roswell test, and even I heard Ed Mitchell, the astronaut, speak on this up in Connecticut, and he said it's part of mainstream science now, and it's too much for Roswell didn't happen as reported.
We think the Air Force got itself into a hole with the cover-up of the UFOs. There's been so much information come out that now they would like to release the truth, but they would look like absolute idiots if they turned around 180 degrees.
But, you know, there's an old line, I wish we could see ourselves the way others see us. It's very instructive to put yourself in the place of an alien and try to get meaning out of what's happening on this planet. Sometimes it's a very discouraging kind of exercise.
More and more information has been released about the existence of extraterrestrial life on other planets. Possibly, we are being conditioned for what may be first contact on Earth by intelligent beings from other worlds. We have seen examples of this in Hollywood movies. Retired military officers have come forward to tell the truth about what our government actually knows. 1997 marked the 50th anniversary of the UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico. Suddenly, it seemed everyone wanted to participate in the anniversary